Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Dr. Ellie Atayee-Bennett. I am a lecturer in sociology at Southampton Solent University, and I'm presenting my PhD research today that looks into faith, veganism, rearticulating religion through sustainable food practice. But I wanted to start with a quote, which I thought would be a nice quote to kick off the day. And it comes from Graham Harvey, who is a religious studies scholar. And he says, if I were to push a claim to its extreme limits, I could assert that religion begins with eating. Now, we could debate whether or not we agree with that, or to what extent we agree or disagree with that, but it really underscores that close relationship that religion and food share, and of which, of course, we will be all exploring today. So let's tell you about all my research. Why is it not changing? Technical issues. There we go. So my research set out to explore the intersection between veganism and Abrahamic religion, so that's Judaism, Christianity and Islam. In a sense, there was a huge research gap. So I wanted to respond to the secular bias in vegan studies, and I wanted to also provide an empirical study on the topic that was very much absent from religious studies. And I wanted to obtain findings that would be useful for activists, both within vegan groups and within religious communities, so that they could understand what this experience looks like and do good with that information. So I had 3 key research questions. How are Muslim, Jewish and Christian vegans reshaping and redefining veganism and religiosity in late modern Great Britain? How do understandings of veganism change form when intersected with religion? And how are veganism, religion and culture negotiated in everyday practice? So I wanted to get a really holistic understanding, looking at both the principles and all that's happening in those decision-making processes, but also what does this look like in practice? What does the everyday lived experience look like? A brief note on methodology then. I recruited 36 faith vegans, 12 Muslims, 12 Jews and 12 Christians. They were all based in the UK and they were all over the age of 18. I employed multiple qualitative methods, so semi-structured interviews, social media-based diary groups, which was essentially group chats on WhatsApp and Facebook, and virtual participant observation, which were online video calls where participants gave me a tour of their kitchen or a cooking demonstration. So all of my research was done during the COVID pandemic, so it all had to be online. So what did I find? Well, participants were concerned about the climate crisis, they were concerned about environmental degradation, the mistreatment of animals, all kinds of topics that fell under that umbrella of ethics and sustainability. But also very key is they felt they had a religious responsibility to act. Now, they could have responded in multiple different ways, but it was veganism that was their chosen action. If you're familiar with veganism, you'll probably come across the terms ethical veganism, which is very much about animals and animal ethics, and also environmental veganism, which is essentially adopting a plant-based diet in a bid to mitigate the climate crisis and lower one's carbon footprint. So, on the surface, the veganism of my participants looked just like any other form of veganism. But when you go beneath the surface and you ask them what were their reasons behind that, we see that there is a whole different underpinning that is religious in nature. This is what I call faith veganism. So I define this as a form of veganism that is intersected with religion and informed by religious ethics and principles. So faith veganism then becomes an individual response to contemporary concerns. It is inspired by modern trends and societal transitions to sustainable food practice, but is underpinned by religiosity, or that religious imperative to care for God's creation. And some of the key principles and values that participants would talk about included stewardship, compassion, justice, these principles that perhaps go by different names, but are all present in all 3 Abrahamic faiths. So how did participants come to this decision? What did this process look like? Well, sociologist Ulrich Beck talks about reflexive religiosity, and this was a key theory that was very evident in my research. And so what this means is individuals engaging with their religions in a reflexive manner. So this could be, evaluating teachings, reinterpreting teachings, reapplying them in different contexts. So my participants would, engage with scripture, they'd engage with what scholars had said, and they would reinterpret them in line with these contemporary concerns, like climate change, like factory farming, etc. And then they would reapply them. So this idea that if I want to be a good steward, for example, then I need to lower my carbon footprint, and adopting a plant-based diet is a really good way of doing that. But at the same time, they were also reinterpreting veganism through a faith lens. So veganism was then not just a lifestyle practice, a philosophy, a political movement, it also became religious. So veganism, or faith veganism I should say, becomes a way of enacting religious principles. It becomes a way of fulfilling religious teachings. But more important than that, it becomes a way to avoid violations in religious teaching. And my participants spoke a lot about those violations that they felt were taking place in modernity, like factory farming, like overconsumption and so on. Faith veganism also became a way to achieve a deeper religious observance. And in essence, it represented a way to care for God's creation. But to become a faith vegan, one must go through a comprehensive learning journey. And faith vegans needed to acquire more knowledge than that of secular or atheist vegans. So you probably know that secular and atheist vegans is a bit of a joke. If you want to become vegan, not only do you need to know what you can and can't eat and where you can buy it from, etc., you've also got to be a nutritionist, you've got to be an animal advocate, you've got to be a sustainability scholar, you've got to be an expert in so many different areas. If you want to be a faith vegan, you've also got to be an expert in religion. So they needed to learn relevant teachings to give weight to their arguments when talking with others. They needed to be confident, articulating principles. They needed to be able to respond to others, especially where there's so much misinformation in society. And they needed to be able to debunk myths. So you see, these first four are very much about responding to others. But they also needed to learn how to negotiate ritual, how to do their own practices and ensure that they are observing their religions all the while. And so, there are some rituals in the three Abrahamic faiths that could be problematic to vegans. Think the Eid sacrifice in Islam or Kaparot in Judaism. So how do you negotiate these in a vegan way? Well, being able to understand the teachings behind these rituals, what scholars have said, whether they are regarded obligatory or just recommended, and of course whether there are any alternatives that are deemed permissible and acceptable within the religion. So this learning journey constituted quite a large challenge for faith vegans, especially in those early days when they were just starting out, they were just finding their feet, and they had so much criticism from others, and they sort of didn't know what they were doing, whether they were doing it right, and of course how to respond to others. And this is not helped by the fact that there's a lack of discourse in religious communities, that these issues are just not being talked about enough. So, it's difficult to source that information, but it can also be lonely. There's a lack of a support network. Some may even come to question their religion. But for others, it was a journey of, falling back in love with their religion, finding their religion, and, developing a deeper deeper relationship with their religion and their God. But it's not all doom and gloom. There's plenty of developments in this area. There's more interest in this area, as evidenced by today. And there's also a rise in various community groups, which I call faith vegan communities, and advocacy groups. So faith vegan communities could be groups on social media, like Facebook groups, where people can ask questions and seek support. But it could also be, you could have advocacy groups, and I've given some examples on the right-hand side there. So lots is going on within the various faith groups to sort of disseminate this information, provide support, but also to engage with religious scholars, leaders, and community members. So in conclusion, faith veganism emerges as a religious response to sustainable food practice. It represents a new articulation of faith in response to climate change and ethical concerns, but it requires a substantial learning journey to overcome those key challenges, and advocacy groups and religious leaders must play a key role in disseminating this information. Oh, thank you.